This is it, part 2 of the Gigantomachy, also known as the Great Giant War. The clash between gods and giants is far from over, and things are about to get even more intense. So grab those thick blankets, crank up the air conditioning, and get ready to sink deep into this ancient storm of chaos and power. Let's get it.
Giants, dangerous and baleful, took up their arms, and the land around them trembled. Cithaeron wavered, lofty Pellene shook, and the beauty of Tempe faded beneath the threat. One giant seized Pindus's peak, another took hold of Oeta, and Mimas raged fiercely in the chaos of the battle. The struggle was not just one of strength, but of vast power that shook mountains and valleys alike, a war that threatened to break the boundaries between earth and sky. Seneca's words also revealed the fearless spirit of the heroes who faced these monstrous foes, showing a courage that knew no cowardice. The warriors stood firm against even the most terrifying of giants, their valor shining bright despite the overwhelming odds. This ancient conflict between gods and gigantes was not merely a tale of brute force, but a story filled with passion, rage, and the clash of mighty wills. It reflected the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the divine rulers of the cosmos and the wild, untamed powers that sought to overthrow them. The myths told how Zeus, the king of the gods, wielded thunderbolts that shattered mountains and crushed his enemies, protecting the world from destruction. The gigantes, born of Gaia and fueled by rebellion, sought to break free from the earth and claim the sky, throwing rocks and flaming trees with terrible strength. Yet time and again, the gods stood against them, with heroes like Heracles fighting alongside the immortals to defend their realm. The story was passed down through ages in poems, plays, and songs, capturing the imagination of people who looked to the heavens and saw in these myths the forces that shaped their world. Even though some questioned the truth of these stories, their power remained in the way they spoke of courage, defiance, and the cosmic order that held the universe together. Through this grand and terrible war on Phlegra's plain, the myths showed that even the mightiest forces must face limits, and that the rule of the gods, though challenged, endured, holding firm against the wild strength of the gigantes and the chaos they brought. The battle between gods and giants was fierce and legendary, fought on the very ground where the earthborn children of Gaia, known as the gigantes, once roamed with power that challenged even the heavens themselves. This war was said to have taken place on the rugged and rocky plain of Pallene, a land shaped by the very battle it hosted. The giants, these monstrous sons of Gaia, were covered by their mother with rocks, trees, and crags, piled high like mountains that reached toward the sky. These giant forms, frozen in stone and myth, still seem to threaten, to battle, or to cower, their shapes etched forever into the landscape as a reminder of their once terrible might. Zeus, the father and king of the gods, wielded his mighty storms and hurled his thunderbolts ceaselessly from the heavens, seeking to subdue these formidable foes. Yet, even among the crags and towering stones, the greatest fear was not in the rocky giants themselves, but in the battle they represented, a clash of forces greater than any mortal eye could fully see or comprehend. In the midst of these ancient conflicts, warriors often spoke of fighting the giants as the highest example of bravery, a proverb for daring courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The giants, terrifying in their size and power, embodied the wild, chaotic strength of the earth itself, their bodies serpentine with hair flowing like snakes, coiling and twisting in battle fury. Dionysus, the god of wine and madness, wielded his ivy-wreathed wand against these serpent-haired hosts, a symbol of nature's power in its wildest form. With this simple yet potent weapon, Dionysos shattered the great band of gigantes, casting the battling ivy against their leader, Porphyrion, driving back Enceladus and striking down Alcyoneus with a shower of leaves. Despite the giant's massive strength, the delicate ivy leaves and vines brought them down, their furious onslaught halted by what might seem a fragile force. The sons of Gaia, with their 200 hands and many-necked heads, pressing against the starry vault of the heavens, bent their knees before this seemingly modest weapon, succumbing not only to thunderbolts and might, but to the unpredictable power of nature's subtle touch. This astonishing victory showed that strength alone was not enough to overcome the gods and their allies. Even the smallest weapon, wielded with divine power and purpose, could fell the greatest adversaries. The giants had long been a symbol of raw power, the embodiment of Earth's untamed fury and chaos. Their battle with the gods was not just a physical fight, but a cosmic struggle between order and disorder, between the forces of civilization and wildness. The myth tells of these monstrous forms being frozen in stone and landscape, reminding all who gazed upon them of the epic war fought between mortal heroes, gods, and the wild children of Gaia. These giant figures, with their bodies clothed in crags and trees, continue to inspire awe and fear in stories passed down through the ages. The Gigantes were more than mere creatures. They were a force of nature, their strength and defiance threatening to overthrow the gods themselves. Yet, time after time, the gods, led by Zeus with his thunderbolt, aided by heroes like Heracles and the subtle power of Dionysus's ivy, managed to push back this primal chaos. The tale of their battle stands as a testament to the eternal fight between control and freedom, order and rebellion, showing that even the mightiest storms must bow before the divine will. This myth, rooted in the earth and sky, tells of a time when the world was young and the boundaries of power were still being tested by these giants who dared to challenge the gods' rule. It is a story of struggle, triumph, and the delicate balance that holds the cosmos together. Dionysos, known also as Bacchus or Laios, stood alone against the snaky sons of Gaia, the giants who were fearsome creatures born from the earth itself. These giants were no ordinary foes. They bore enormous serpents flowing over their shoulders, twisting and curling on both sides, larger and more terrifying than even the great Enochian snake. They moved restlessly among the stars of heaven, their hissing sounds echoing in the cosmic night, as if the very sky was filled with the sounds of their wild rage and unending fury. Despite their monstrous nature and overwhelming numbers, Dionysos, the champion of Zeus, wielded his powerful wand and fought with unmatched courage and strength. Alone, he cut down these vast and terrible beings, driving them back with his deadly blows, proving that even the mightiest earthborn giants could not stand against the will of the gods. Yet, not all in the divine realm looked upon Dionysus kindly. Hera, the queen of the gods, bore a deep grudge against him. She prayed deceitfully to All-Mother Gaia, the earth herself, lamenting the valor of Dionysus and the destruction he had caused to her own children. Hearing of the swift downfall of the Indian nation at the hands of Zeus's son, Gaia groaned with sorrow and anger, and in her wrath, she summoned the mountain-ranging tribes of Gigantes, her own brood, to rise against Dionysus. She spurred her monstrous sons to launch a fierce attack, urging them to hurl towering rocks and savage blows against the god who had brought ruin to her family. Gaia's fierce cry called upon her sons to bind Dionysus, to capture him alive and bring him as a captive, so that he might be held in chains and prevented from ruling alongside Zeus on Olympus. She dreamed of giving her sons glorious brides, Hebe to Porphyrion, Aphrodite to Chthonios, Athena as the bedfellow of Enceladus, and Artemis paired with Alcyoneus, hoping to strengthen her line and defy the gods. In her rage, Gaia wanted Dionysus brought to her so she might stir the wrath of Zeus, making him see his son as a slave under her spear, hoping to wound or kill Dionysus as had happened once before to Zagreus, another son lost to strife. This fierce call to battle shows the deep divisions and wild passions among the gods and their opponents, where love, hatred, power, and revenge mix in the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The giants, though born of earth, were not mere monsters, but were wrapped in the complex politics and emotions of the divine world, tied closely to the fate of gods and mortals alike. Dionysus, standing against them with his ivy wreath and wand, symbolized not only the wild forces of nature, but also the triumph of divine order and courage over primal rebellion. The story of this war between Dionysus and the Gigantes reveals the endless conflict between new gods and old powers, between change and tradition, and the costly battles fought in the shadows of the heavens and upon the earth. It was a battle of cosmic importance, where the fate of gods and the balance of the world itself hung in the balance, fought with weapons both mighty and subtle, and with forces that shaped the very landscape and sky. In the fierce battle stirred by Gaia's anger, she roused all the Gigantes, those mighty earthborn giants, to rise against Dionysus, calling them to arms with fierce determination. These were not just ordinary warriors. They were beings born from the very earth, each carrying great strength and terrifying weapons. Some bore the massive bulwark of Nysa, a fortress-like shield. Others carried jagged rocks torn from cliffs high in the clouds, ready to hurl them with deadly force. Among them was one who bore a rocky hill lifted from a distant land, its base still surrounded by the salty brine of the sea, and another carried a reef ripped from an isthmus surrounded by ocean waves. Pelorius, one of the giants, seized the towering peak of Mount Pelion, lifting it high in his countless arms to use as a crushing missile, while the cave of Philaire was left exposed as its rocky roof was torn away, making the old centaur Chiron tremble in fear. Chiron, the wise and noble half-man, half-horse figure, was shaken by the sheer destruction and the fury of the giants' assault. But Dionysus, called Bacchus in the stories, was no ordinary god of wine and revelry. He held in his hand not a fierce spear or a sharp sword, but a simple bunch of vines known as giant's bane. With this seemingly delicate weapon, he charged at the mighty Alcyoneus, one of the fiercest of the Gigantes, who towered over the battlefield wielding mountains and rocks. Dionysus did not rely on brute force, but struck swiftly with the vines, cutting off the countless hands of the giants. Their many serpent-like arms severed by the tender but deadly leaves. The ground-bred serpents that covered the giants writhed and were chopped away by the vine's sharp touch, and even the monstrous heads, tangled with viper-like hair, were severed and fell lifeless to the dusty ground. Countless tribes of giants fell that day, their vast numbers crushed beneath the power of Dionysus. Rivers of blood flowed endlessly from the slain, painting the ravines a deep crimson red, as the earth itself drank their defeat. The wild snakes that had been part of the giants' terrible forms scattered in fear before the viper-like tendrils of Dionysus, who moved among them like a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable. But the god's power did not end with the vine. He also wielded the fierce element of fire. Bacchus hurled a burning torch into the air, and the flames spread quickly, running like wildfire along the high paths of the battlefield. The Bacchic flame leapt and curled, casting corrosive sparks that rained down upon the limbs of the giants, scorching and burning them with merciless heat. Among the serpents that adorned the giants, there was one especially large and fearsome creature that roared and hissed in agony as the flames touched it, thrashing wildly in a desperate attempt to escape the wrath of the god. The fire and the vine together formed a deadly combination that brought ruin to the Gigantes, who had once seemed invincible in their rage and power. This battle was more than just a fight for survival. It was a clash of forces that shaped the world and its future. Gaia's anger was fierce, but Dionysus stood as the embodiment of a new order, one that would not be undone by the old powers of the earth. His victory was the victory of the gods who ruled Olympus and of the divine will that maintained balance between chaos and order. This tale, told in the ancient epics, speaks of the great struggle where monstrous beings born of earth and serpent were challenged and defeated by a god armed with nothing but a humble vine and a torch of fire. A reminder that even the smallest weapons in the hands of the divine can bring down the mightiest foes. The dance of destruction and survival continued as the earth shook. The heavens watched, and the stars bore witness to the fall of the Gigantes, who had dared to challenge the gods themselves. The battle raged with unending chaos as Dionysos, known as Bacchus, raised himself tall amidst the tumult, lifting high his fiery torch above the heads of his enemies. Flames roared and twisted fiercely, casting a blazing light that seemed like a mirror of the thunderbolt hurled by Zeus himself. The fire spread like a wild storm, rolling over the mighty form of Enceladus, scorching the air and heating it with intense fury. But even this fierce blaze did not force the giant to kneel or yield, for Enceladus was reserved for the final strike of Zeus's thunderbolt. Meanwhile, the vast and powerful Alcyoneus, another of the great Gigantes, sprang forward, brandishing the jagged crags from Thrace as weapons, lifting a towering peak from the wintry mountain of Haemus, with the intent to crush Dionysus beneath it. Yet Dionysus, wrapped in the fawn skin of Laios, remained unharmed as the rocks shattered against the magical skin, unable to tear it, breaking into splinters instead. In another fierce part of the battle, Typhoeus, a terrible giant, who once had ripped many parts of the earth from his mother Gaia, hurled heavy mountain pieces from the rugged lands of Emathia towards Dionysus, trying with all his might to crush the god. But the god of wine and revelry, quick and fierce, pulled a sword from the hand of a fallen enemy and swung it at the heads of the Gigantes, slicing through their dreadful, snake-like hair that spat poison and smoke. Even when unarmed, Dionysus was a whirlwind of destruction, striking with the long, tough ivy vines that climbed trees and twisted like serpents, beating down the giants with relentless fury. His mighty weapon, the man-breaking Thyrsus, was capable of felling all his foes, but by his own will, he withdrew from the fight before completely wiping them out, leaving some enemies alive for his father Zeus to finish. From this great and terrible battle arose the titles of the gods, such as Gigantolaterra, the female who destroyed the giants, and Gigantoletis, also feminine, as well as Gigantolator, a masculine form, all names that speak of the gods' power to overcome these monstrous foes and keep the world safe. The story of the Gigantomachy, this war between the gods and the mighty giants born from the earth, is one of endless battle, thunder and fire, great strength and divine power clashing in a struggle that shaped the fate of gods and men alike, where no simple force was enough, but only the united might of gods and heroes could bring down such enormous, terrifying foes. This tale, passed down through ages, shows the balance between chaos and order, destruction and creation, and the divine justice that preserves the world from falling into darkness. The battlefield of the great Gigantomachia, the War of the Giants, is known in the ancient stories as the Plains of Phlegra, a name that carries weight and meaning through the ages, echoed by many writers and poets. At first, early authors placed this fierce and terrible battle on the Thracian peninsula called Pallene, a wild and rugged land in the far north, where the giants, born of the earth, first rose up to challenge the gods. Later writers, however, shifted the scene to the thermally active and volcanic region of Campania in southern Italy, where the ground still trembles with the memory of fire and fury. Yet other voices came from the Arcadians, the mountain folk of central Greece, who claimed that the war had taken place in a hidden valley within their own land, a place known for ancient power and mystery. Pindar, the great lyric poet, sang of how the gods themselves marched to battle against the giants on this very plain of Phlegra, a battlefield where glory and terror met in deadly combat. Athena, the wise and fierce goddess of war and wisdom, stood as a bold marshal surveying the wide expanse of the Phlegraean plain, ready to lead the gods against their monstrous foes, as described by the tragic poet Aeschylus. The comic playwright Aristophanes also mentions this plain, calling it the place where the gods withered the pride of the Gigantes, the earth-born giants, those dreadful children of Gaia who dared to reach for the heavens and overthrow the divine order. According to the mythographer Pseudo-Apollodorus, the land where the giant Alcyoneus was born was indeed Pallene, tying this fearsome creature to the very soil of the battlefield. This same source later recounts that it was at Phlegra where the gods finally reduced the mighty Gigantes, cutting down their numbers and ending their terrible war against Olympus. The poet Lycophron called Pallene the nurse of the earth-born giants, the motherland that had given birth to these colossal beings whose strength shook the very earth. He also speaks of the plains of the Sithonians and the fields of Pallene, watered by the ox-horned river god Bricon, who served the giants, feeding them and helping them grow strong with the life-giving waters flowing from his rivers. The great geographer Strabo, writing many centuries later, notes that the Phlegrian plain near Cumae in Italy had become the legendary setting for the stories of the Gigantes, not necessarily because the events had truly taken place there, but because the land was so magnificent and fitting for such epic tales. This plain, rich and fiery, seemed the perfect stage for a battle so vast and terrible, where gods clashed with giants and the fate of the world hung in the balance. The ancient stories tell us that it was here on these fiery plains that the heavens opened with thunder and lightning, and that the earth itself groaned under the footsteps of the mighty Gigantes, who hurled mountains and great stones with their hands, shaking the ground beneath the feet of gods and mortals alike. This battlefield was not just a place of war, but a symbol of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the divine forces who sought to maintain balance and the wild, destructive powers born of the very earth. The gods, led by Zeus, called upon their courage and power, joined by heroes like Heracles, to face these enormous foes. The clash was fierce and long, with fire and thunder, with arrows and mighty clubs, as the very landscape bore the scars of their battle. Mountains toppled and rivers ran red with the blood of the fallen, as the gods slowly but surely gained the upper hand. The battlefield of Phlegra thus remains in the ancient imagination as a place of primal conflict, where the fate of gods and men was decided, where the earth-born giants met their doom, and where the power of Olympus was forever secured. This war, told and retold by poets, playwrights, and historians, became a timeless myth, binding together the lands of Thrace, Italy, and Arcadia, a testament to the enduring power of the stories that shaped the world and the heavens above. The land known as Phlegra, stretching from Baiae to Cumae, is marked by strange and fierce signs of its ancient past, for the whole district emits a foul smell of sulfur and fire, and the hot waters that flow from its springs and streams seem almost alive with the wounds of a terrible battle fought long ago. Many believe that the very name Phlegra, meaning blazing land, comes from the fiery scars left by the thunderbolts of Zeus as he fought the mighty Gigantes, the giants born of the earth, whose flesh and bones are said to still burn beneath the surface of this volcanic land. These legends say that the great wounds of the fallen giants continue to pour out fire and smoke through the earth, setting the land aflame and filling the air with the smell of brimstone. It is here, in this volcanic region of Campania, that the most famous battle of the gods and the Gigantes is remembered, the war that shook the heavens and the earth alike. Yet some of the giants, those survivors of the terrible war, were said to have fled to the mountains and hills nearby, hiding in the shadows, but they were eventually hunted down and destroyed by Heracles, the great hero who fought alongside the gods to preserve their reign. This tale of Heracles pursuing and defeating the remnants of the Gigantes near the town of Leuca in southern Italy speaks to the lasting fear and hatred the gods held for these earthborn creatures, who had once dared to challenge the order of Olympus itself. But this story was not only told of Italy. The ancient peninsula of Pallene in Thrace was once called Phlegra as well, and it was believed to be the original home of the Gigantes. Here too, the myths say, the earthborn giants once roamed and raised their terrible hands against the gods. This Thracian land, wild and untamed, was said to be the breeding ground for these lawless and violent beings, whose very presence defiled the land and threatened the balance of the cosmos. It was here, the tales say, that the gods first clashed with the giants, and it was Heracles, that mighty son of Zeus, who descended upon this land after sacking the city of Troy and sailed back toward his homeland, destroying these savage creatures and scattering their power forever. The region of Pallene, then, was not only a place of myth, but also a symbol of the struggle between civilization and chaos, between divine order and primal violence. Even in the heart of Greece, in the region of Arcadia, another version of the story survives, where the people claim that the great battle between gods and giants happened near the village of Trapezus. Here, the Arcadians say, the struggle was so fierce that the very elements themselves, lightning, thunder, and violent storms, were born from the clash. At this sacred place, the people offered sacrifices to the forces of the sky, hoping to appease the powers that had once torn the heavens and the earth apart. These local stories show how deeply the myth of the Gigantomachy, the war of the giants, had woven itself into the fabric of the Greek world, touching distant lands and giving each place its own meaning and memory of that primordial fight. The ancient historian Diodorus Siculus confirms the importance of Pallene as the battlefield where the Gigantes first rose up in rebellion against the gods, choosing to wage war against the immortals who ruled the heavens. The Gigantes, born of Gaia in her anger and bound to the earth, were enormous in size and strength, terrifying creatures who dared to reach the skies and challenge the power of Zeus himself. Their rebellion was the most dangerous threat the gods ever faced, for the giants could only be defeated with the help of a mortal hero, Heracles, whose courage and strength made him worthy to fight alongside the divine. Thus, the Battle of Phlegra was not just a fight between gods and monsters. It was a turning point that defined the order of the universe. It was where the forces of chaos were finally checked, and where the reign of the Olympian gods was secured. This war was long and terrible, filled with fire, thunder, and earth-shaking blows. Mountains were torn apart, Rivers ran red with blood, and the very sky seemed to darken under the weight of the battle. But in the end, the gods triumphed, and the Gigantes were crushed beneath the might of Zeus's thunderbolts and the arrows of Heracles, the mortal champion. The legacy of this ancient war lingers on in the lands of Greece and Italy, in the hot springs of Campania and the wild hills of Thrace, in the myths and stories told through the ages. It is a reminder of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the divine and the monstrous, and the courage it takes to defend the world against destruction. Heracles, after leaving the banks of the Tiber River, traveled along the coast of what is now known as Italy, coming upon a place called the Cumaean Plain, also known by the older name Phlegraean, meaning fiery plain. This land was famed not only for its striking natural features, but also for being the home of men known for their great strength and lawlessness. Men called the Gigantes, or giants, who were earthborn and of enormous size. The plain's fiery name came from a great mountain there, once famous for spouting tremendous fire and smoke, much like the great volcano Aetna or Etna in Sicily, which was known for its dangerous eruptions. This mountain, however, was later called Vesuvius, and to this day it shows signs of the fire and fury that once raged in ancient times, reminding all who live nearby of the fierce battles that once shook the very ground beneath their feet. The myths say that these Gigantes, born from the earth herself, rose up in rebellion against the gods, their monstrous forms and terrifying power threatening to overturn the natural order and challenge the reign of Zeus and his fellow immortals. But Zeus, the king of the gods, fought against them fiercely, with wars not only near this fiery plain, but also in other places such as Macedonia near the peninsula called Pallene, where another great battle took place. In those ancient times, the land was named Phlegraeon, a name born from the fires and destruction caused by the conflict, though later people came to call it Cumaean or Cumae. These wars were remembered not only for the destruction they wrought, but for the courage and might displayed by the gods and their mortal allies who stood against the giants. The Roman poet Valerius Flaccus wrote about these battles in his epic Argonautica, describing Pallene as a place feared by the gods, a fated battleground where monstrous forms of Earth's children, the Gigantes, once roamed freely, their presence shaking the ground beneath their heavy feet. The land itself would tremble and quake when Zeus, wielding his thunderbolt, struck the plain of Phlegra with fury, casting the mighty and terrible Typhon, a great and fearsome monster, back into the deepest pits of the earth from which he had risen. Among all the giants, two stood out as the greatest and most dangerous: Porphyrion and Alcyoneus. Alcyoneus was especially feared because he was immortal, but only as long as he remained fighting within the land where he was born. He was the one who had driven away the cattle of Helios, the sun god, from Erythea, a place known as the Isle of Sunset, making him a powerful foe even among the giants. The fight between Heracles and Alcyoneus was a crucial part of the war, for it was only with the help of the mortal hero Heracles that the gods could finally overcome the giants, who were otherwise invincible to their divine attacks alone. Heracles was called upon by the gods to be their ally, and with his strength and courage, he played a vital role in turning the tide of the battle, helping the gods secure their reign and bring peace once more to the cosmos. This ancient war, fought on the fiery plains and rugged lands of Italy and Macedonia, stands as a powerful reminder of the eternal struggle between the forces of chaos and order, between the monstrous and the divine, and the bravery required to protect the world from destruction. The myths, poems, and histories that tell these stories continue to echo through the ages, giving voice to the mighty deeds of gods and heroes, and the terrible power of the Gigantes who dared to challenge the heavens. Heracles was summoned by Zeus with the wise help of Athena to join the gods in their fierce battle against the mighty Gigantes, the great and terrible giants who threatened the order of the world. One of the most fearsome among these giants was Alcyoneus, a figure towering like a mountain, a warrior of incredible strength and power. When Heracles first fought Alcyoneus, he shot an arrow at him, striking the giant and causing him to fall to the ground, though the giant recovered some of his strength as he lay there. Athena, ever wise and strategic, advised Heracles to drag the wounded Alcyoneus away from his home ground of Pallene, knowing that the giant's strength was tied to the land where he was born. Acting on her counsel, Heracles dragged the great giant away from Pallene, and it was only then, away from his birthplace, that Alcyoneus finally succumbed to death, his life extinguished far from the place that had given him power. The battle at Phlegra was brutal and fierce, with Heracles showing unmatched courage and might as he faced off against the giants. Among those defeated were the Meropes, a fierce group of warriors, and the great giant Alcyoneus himself, a man of terror and strength unmatched. The giant had once wielded rocks as his only weapon and had felled 12 chariots, each drawn by 4 horses, along with the proud horsemen who rode them, twice as many men as the number of chariots, showing the giant's terrifying power on the battlefield. Heracles, however, was a force to be reckoned with, and he fought with the fierce energy of a god's champion, releasing the powerful music of his bowstring to strike down the mountain-like giant. The great poet Homer, in his epic stories, described the Gigantes as mortal beings, not divine creatures, and his words were clear when speaking of Alcyoneus, who was once a king among the proud giants. Homer spoke of how Alcyoneus destroyed many in his arrogance and power, but was himself destroyed in the end, a warning to those who would seek to defy the gods. The giant Alcyoneus was said to be 9 cubits tall, a height equal to about 4 meters or 13.5 feet, making him a towering figure beyond the imagination of ordinary men. Alongside Alcyoneus, another of the greatest giants was Porphyrion, a terrible foe who challenged both Heracles and Hera during the war. In the heat of battle, Porphyrion, driven by the will of Zeus, was filled with passion and fury towards Hera. He rushed at them both, and in his wild assault, he tore Hera's gown, intending to violate her. Hera cried out for help, and Zeus responded with a thunderbolt, striking down the giant, while Heracles finished him off with an arrow, ensuring Porphyrion's fall. The battle between the gods and the giants was not only a contest of strength, but also one of wills and strategy, with each side fighting for control of the cosmos. Heracles' role was pivotal, as without his mortal bravery and skill, the gods might not have been able to overcome the fierce and numerous giants. These tales from ancient poets and mythographers paint a vivid picture of a world where gods and monsters clashed, where the earth trembled under the feet of giants, and where heroes like Heracles rose to challenge the impossible. The memory of these battles endures, reminding us of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, the mortal and the divine, and the bravery required to protect the world from destruction. During the Great War, known as the Gigantomachy, a fierce and violent battle unfolded between the gods and the mighty Gigantes, monstrous sons of Gaia who rose up to challenge the rule of Olympus. Among these giants, Porphyrion stood out as one of the most powerful and proud warriors. It was said that he did not fully understand the overwhelming strength of Zeus when he provoked the king of gods beyond all limits. But as with all acts of violence and arrogance, Porphyrion's pride led to his downfall, for ruin waits even for the most boastful and hard-hearted. The fate that befell Porphyrion was shared by others, such as the terrifying Cilician Typhon, the monstrous giant with 100 heads, who also could not escape his doom. Both these mighty foes were struck down by the thunderbolt of Zeus, the divine weapon that brought destruction upon the challengers of Olympus. Apollon, the archer god, added his deadly shafts to the fight, piercing the enemies and helping to secure the victory of the gods. In the world of Greek comedy, this fierce figure Porphyrion even gave his name to a species of bird, the Porphyrion or purple coot, clad in the skins of leopards, humorously imagined by the playwright Aristophanes as a troop sent up to attack heaven itself, showing how deeply this myth was woven into the culture and imagination of ancient Greece. According to Ptolemy Hephaestion's account, Heracles, the greatest of mortal heroes, was called Nilos at birth, but earned his famous name after a crucial moment when he saved Hera by killing a fierce, nameless giant who breathed fiery breath and attacked the goddess. This act not only won him favor with the gods, but changed his very identity, marking him as a hero who had escaped the danger that threatened even divine figures like Hera. Among the opponents Athena faced in the War of the Gigantes were Enceladus and Pallas, both mighty giants who fought fiercely against the gods. Some traditions hold that Pallas was not a Gigante, but a Titan, an ancient enemy of Athena from an earlier time known as the Titanomachia, the War of the Titans. The fierce battles between gods and giants and gods and titans are often intertwined in myth, showing the complex nature of divine conflict in Greek storytelling. These stories were preserved and retold by mythographers like Pseudo-Apollodorus, who detailed the heroic deeds and fierce combats of gods and monsters. The war was a great struggle not just for power, but for the very order of the cosmos, with the gods fighting to maintain their rule over the heavens and the earth against chaotic forces born from the primal earth itself. Through thunderbolts, arrows, and divine strength, the gods triumphed, but the tales of these battles carried deeper meanings about bravery, justice, and the natural order, themes that resonated through Greek culture and literature for centuries. During the great and fierce war between the gods and the mighty Gigantes, one of the most memorable moments involved the giant Enceladus, who was caught in the throes of defeat and attempted to flee the battlefield. As Enceladus fled, the goddess Athena, known for her wisdom and strength in battle, took a decisive action that would become a lasting part of the myth. With great force and precision, she hurled the island of Sicilia, which is known today as Sicily, directly at Enceladus in an effort to stop his flight and bring him low. This act was not merely an ordinary throw. It was a powerful strike that symbolized the crushing of the giant's rebellious spirit under the weight of divine punishment. The myth explains why Sicily is often associated with fire and volcanic activity, as it was said to smolder with the fiery breath of Enceladus trapped beneath its surface, shaking the earth and filling the land with smoke and flame. The famous Mount of Aetna, or Etna, is described as trembling and glowing with fire because it rests upon the imprisoned body of this defeated giant, forever holding him down beneath its burning depths. As the battle raged on, Athene showed not only her might, but also her resourcefulness. She stripped the skin off the giant palace and used it to shield her own body, turning the very flesh of her enemy into armor to protect herself during the fierce fighting. This vivid image highlights the brutal and intimate nature of the conflict between gods and giants, where every advantage was seized in the desperate struggle for victory. Even after the battle was over, the weariness of combat lingered, and the goddess Athena, known also as Athena, took care to cleanse herself and her horses. She did not wash her mighty arms until she had released her horses from their harnesses and allowed them to drink from the pure springs of Okeanos, where she carefully washed away the dust and grime of battle, as well as the sweat and foam from their mouths after the intense exertion. This ritual cleansing symbolized the end of her warlike duties and a return to calm, emphasizing the connection between divine warriors and the natural world from which they drew strength and to which they returned. The ancient poet Callimachus reflected on this mythic tradition, connecting the fiery mountain Aetna with the imprisoned Enceladus, noting how the three-forked island of Sicily lies heavy upon the deadly giant. His words capture the power and terror of the giant's defeat, reminding listeners and readers of the immense forces at play beneath the Earth's surface, locked in eternal struggle. Lycophron, another Greek poet, described Sicily as an island that crushed the back of the Gigantes and Typhon, another monstrous figure from Greek mythology, and that it was a land boiling with flame, an eternal reminder of the gods' triumph over chaos and destruction. The travel writer Pausanias, centuries later, recorded that Athene was also given the surname Hippia, meaning horse, linking her to the imagery of her battle steeds and her role as a warrior goddess. The stories he recounts explain that during the great battle of the gods and the Gigantes, Athene's prowess and the symbolic weight of her horses were integral to the gods' victory, reinforcing her status as a powerful and strategic deity. These myths, preserved through poetry, travelogues, and scholarly writings, show the deep interweaving of natural phenomena like volcanic eruptions and the Earth's trembling with the ancient Greeks' understanding of divine warfare and cosmic order. The fire and smoke rising from Mount Aetna were not just geological facts, but signs of the fallen giant Enceladus struggling beneath, a constant reminder of the gods' victory and the continuing presence of divine power in the natural world. The tales of Athene's cleverness in battle, her use of Pallas's skin for protection, and her care for her horses after the conflict provide vivid images of a goddess who is both fierce and wise, embodying the complex qualities that made her one of the most revered figures in Greek mythology. These stories bring to life the epic scale of the Gigantomachy and show how the gods maintained their rule by subduing monstrous forces that threaten the cosmos, while also highlighting the connection between myth, nature, and the divine in ancient Greek thought. The goddess drove her chariot and horses against Enceladus, the great giant who was one of the fiercest enemies of the gods. This battle was fierce and mighty, for Enceladus was no ordinary giant but a towering figure whose power shook the earth itself. In one famous story, Enceladus was struck down beneath the island of Thrinacia, known today as Sicily, by Zeus's mighty levin, his thunderbolt, which consumed the giant in flames. The smoke from this burning rose across the entire isle, filling the skies with thick clouds and fire, marking the place forever as a land of power and divine wrath. In older tales, the goddess Pallas, who is another name for Athena, took mighty action by lifting the entire island of Sicily high into the air and then forcefully dashing it down upon the huge form of Enceladus. The island, it is said, still burns with the fire of that immortal giant, as he lies trapped beneath the earth, breathing out flames and smoke in his eternal agony. This story was well known among the people, and the poetical myths that surrounded Mount Aetna or Etna were commonly told, forming dramatic and powerful tales that the poets loved to recount. They said that either the monstrous Typho or Enceladus himself lies bound beneath the mountain of Etna, and it is his fiery breath that causes the volcanic eruptions and smoke seen above. This fiery presence under the mountain symbolizes the death agony of a once mighty foe, held forever beneath the earth by the gods' punishment. Meanwhile, the stars also hold stories connected to this mythic battle. The constellation Draco, or the dragon, is said to have been thrown at the goddess Minerva, or Athena, by the Gigantes during their struggle. Athena caught the twisted form of this dragon and cast it into the heavens, fixing it near the pole of the sky, where it still appears with its coiled, twisting body. The image of Draco in the stars is thus a reminder of the ancient fight between gods and giants, a cosmic symbol of divine victory and order imposed upon chaos. The volcanic mountain of Etna itself reflects the continuing presence of Enceladus beneath the earth. Whenever the giant shifts his side, the mountain rumbles and thunders from its caves, overflowing with lava and fire, narrowing the nearby Pelorus flood and changing the shape of the land. Though the giant is imprisoned, the land and sea around Sicily respond to his restless power, as if hoping one day to break free and return. The three-peaked hill of Sicily, which covers the trapped Enceladus, stands as a mighty and fiery monument to the ancient wars of the gods, a physical reminder of divine justice and the struggle to maintain order in a world filled with powerful, untamed forces. These stories, passed down through the ages, show how the natural world, the fire of volcanoes, the movement of the earth, and the stars above, were deeply connected in the ancient mind to the great battles between gods and giants, to the mighty punishments given to those who challenged the heavens, and to the eternal power of the gods who rule over all. The giant Enceladus, known in myth as one of the most fearsome of the Gigantes, was struck down by the thunderbolt, which belched forth in bright beams reaching high into the sky, releasing the eternal fire that burns in the heart of the Sicilian mountain Aetna, known today as Mount Etna. This volcanic fire is said to be the very breath and fury of Enceladus trapped beneath the earth, whose restless movements cause the mountain to erupt and smoke. The goddess Pallas, another name for the great virgin goddess Athena, is often said to have received this name either because she brandished her spear, the act called palain in Greek, or because she defeated and killed the giant Pallas during the mighty battles of the gods against the giants. This fight was part of the larger conflict known as the Gigantomachy, where the earthborn giants rose against the Olympian gods in a desperate attempt to seize control of the heavens and the world itself. Among the great opponents in this war was Polybotes, a giant who was fiercely pursued by the god Poseidon through the seas. The chase took them near the island of Kos, where Poseidon, in a dramatic and powerful act, tore off a piece of the island called Nisyros and hurled it at Polybotes. This fragment of land became its own island, which legends say still lies atop the buried giant, keeping him trapped and defeated beneath its weight. Some say that Polybotes lies beneath Kos itself, while others hold that he is imprisoned beneath the smaller island of Nisyros, forever held down by the mighty trident of the sea god. The story of Polybotes and Poseidon was well known among the people of the Greek islands, and statues such as one near the temple of Demeter in Athens depict Poseidon on horseback, spear in hand, throwing his deadly weapon at the giant. This imagery reminds all who see it of the power of the gods to overcome even the greatest of monstrous foes and maintain order against chaos. Another fierce giant in the war was Mimas, who met his end at the hands of the blacksmith god Hephaestus. During the battles, Hephaestus threw molten iron at Mimas, burning and killing him with his fiery weapons forged in the divine forge. Mimas's death is part of the vivid stories that tell of gods and giants clashing with fire, metal, and immense strength. The Argonautica, a great Greek epic, recalls these battles and the fierce might of the gods who used all their power to stop the monstrous Gigantes from overthrowing the divine order. These myths not only tell of heroic deeds and terrible fights, but also explain natural wonders in the world, such as volcanic eruptions and island formations, connecting the gods' wars with the Earth's very features. Mount Etna's fiery eruptions were not seen as random acts of nature, but as the breathing and struggling of Enceladus beneath, while islands like Nisyros are living monuments to the gods' victories. Through these stories, the ancient Greeks found meaning and power in the land around them, seeing their sacred myths reflected in the earth, sea, and sky. The tales of Athena, Poseidon, Hephaestus, and the giants like Enceladus, Polybotes, and Mimas are not just stories of battle, but also stories of how the gods shaped the world, defeated chaos, and maintained the balance that holds the cosmos in place. Among the many stories told, one stands out about Hephaestus, the god of fire and the forge, who was carried away by Helios, the radiant sun god, in his chariot after Hephaestus had fallen exhausted on the battlefield of Phlegra. The battle had been long and brutal, and even gods felt the weight of the conflict. Hephaestus, though mighty in his power over fire and metal, was not immune to weariness, and Helios, shining bright across the skies, took him up and bore him away to recover. Another giant known from these tales was Mimas, a fierce and terrible foe who fell not to an ordinary hand, but to the god Ares himself, the god of war. Aeetes, a king and warrior, was said to wear the armor given to him by Ares, forged in the fires of combat after Ares had slain Mimas with his own hands on the field of Phlegra. This armor was stiff and strong, a sign of the power and valor in that legendary fight, marking Aeetes as a warrior favored by the gods and a victor over the monstrous giant. Among the giants, there was Olympus, who had a close connection to Zeus himself. Olympus of Crete was said to be the one who had taken Zeus, son of Kronos, and raised him in secret, teaching him divine knowledge. Yet, the story tells that Zeus eventually struck down Olympus, his foster parent and master, because Olympus had encouraged the Gigantes to rise against Zeus and challenge the divine order. After killing Olympus, Zeus was filled with remorse and sorrow that he could not easily soothe. In honor of the fallen giant, and perhaps as a sign of regret, Zeus gave his own name to the tomb where Olympus was laid, a reminder of the complicated bonds and bitter conflicts within the divine world. This tale shows how even gods were not free from pain and difficult choices, and how the war between the Olympians and giants was not just a simple fight of good versus evil, but a tragic struggle involving deep emotions and betrayal. The myths also tell of Saturnus, or Kronos, the ancient Titan who was overthrown by Zeus. In his anger and bitterness, Kronos stirred up the mighty Titanes and perhaps the Gigantes to arms once again, seeking to reclaim what was lost and avenge his defeat. This act of rebellion and the gathering of forces led to further battles that echoed the earlier wars, reminding all of the continuing strife between the old powers of the Titans and the new order of the Olympians. Another tale that ties the giants to the natural world is about the plant called moly, which Homer mentions in his epics. This magical plant was said to have grown from the blood of a giant killed on the island of Circe, the enchantress, with the help of Helios, the sun god. The plant had a white flower and was known for its powers to protect and to counter magic. The name moly is linked to the Greek word malos, meaning hard or difficult, a nod to the fierce battle fought and the power of the giant whose blood gave birth to this wondrous herb. This story connects the world of myth with the real, showing how nature and legend intertwine, where even plants hold the memory of divine battles and heroic deeds. Through all these tales, the Gigantes remain symbols of chaotic and wild forces, challenging the gods who represent order and justice. Their battles shape the earth itself, from volcanic fires to mysterious plants, and their stories have echoed through time as powerful reminders of the eternal struggle between freedom and control, chaos and order, destruction and creation. Heracles, the great hero of Greek myth, is remembered not only for his immense strength and daring deeds, but also for a curious detail about his armor, a detail that links him directly to the giants, those fearsome foes of the gods, contrary to the common belief that he wore the skin of the mighty Nemean lion. Ancient stories tell us that Heracles actually wore the skin of a certain lion, a lion-headed gigante, one of the giants he himself had challenged to single combat and slain. This detail reveals the intimate and violent connection between the hero and the monstrous beings he battled, showing that even the weapons and armor of heroes could come from their defeated enemies, turning the power of the giants to the advantage of the gods and their champions. This image of a lion-headed gigante is not just a tale, but is immortalized in ancient art, such as the famous relief from Pergamon, where the Gigantomachy, the great battle between gods and giants, is vividly depicted, and the lion-headed giant stands as a terrifying symbol of the wild, chaotic forces the gods sought to tame. The stories also tell us about the magnificent horses Xanthos and Balios, famous steeds ridden by the great warrior Achilles. These horses, known for their speed and strength, were not ordinary creatures, but once belonged to the Gigantes. Unlike many other immortal horses, sons of the wind gods who often had their own agendas, Xanthos and Balios were unique because they fought alongside the gods during the great battle against their own brothers, the other immortal horses. This allegiance shows how even creatures born from chaos and wild power could be tamed or persuaded to fight for order and justice, siding with the divine forces against rebellion and disorder. Their story links the heroic age of men with the ancient battles of gods and monsters, weaving a continuous thread of conflict and alliance that shaped the world. From the blood of the giants, legends say, a new race of men was born, a dark and violent heritage that carried the legacy of their monstrous ancestors. The poet Lycophron speaks of the Pelasgians, a people who traced their origins back to the blood of the Scythonian Gigantes. This idea that humans descended from the blood of giants carries a powerful symbolism, suggesting that humanity itself was born from a violent and tumultuous beginning, inheriting both strength and wildness from the chaotic forces defeated by the gods. The Roman poet Ovid elaborates on this grim birth story, describing how, after the giants lay crushed and broken in their defeat, Gaia, the Earth Mother, drenched with the blood of her children, gave life to that warm gore, reshaping it into human form. Yet these new beings, though human in shape, did not inherit peace or respect for the gods. They were cruel and bloodthirsty, despising the divine and reveling in violence and outrage. This story ties the origins of mankind to the divine struggles above, casting humanity as heirs to the chaotic and rebellious spirit of the giants, a reminder of the thin line between order and disorder that defines the human condition. The tale does not end with the defeat of the giants. Some survivors are said to have fled to distant lands, seeking refuge from the wrath of the gods. Among these places is Lucca, a small town in Italy, where a fountain is said to emit a foul smell, a lingering reminder of the terrible battles fought nearby. Strabo, the ancient geographer, recounts that the peninsula of Palene, once called Phlegra or the Blazing Land, was the site where these giants lived. a place scarred by volcanic fire and the wounds of battle. Some of the Gigantes who survived the war fled to the region of Campania, near Phlegra, while others sought shelter on islands such as Mykonos, far from the reach of Olympus. The stories of these wandering giants speak to the lasting impact of the Gigantomachy, how the conflict between gods and giants shaped not only the heavens and the earth, but also the course of human history and geography, leaving behind signs in the landscape and memory that endure through time. In Italy, the plains of Cumae, once known as the Phlegrian Fields, are described as a land still smoking and full of fire, echoing the violent fires that raged during the War of the Giants. These volcanic lands stand as eternal witnesses to the clash between divine and monstrous forces, where the earth itself seems to remember the terrible battle and the giants' defeat. The connection between myth and place is strong here, where natural phenomena like volcanic eruptions are seen as the wounds of the fallen giants, spilling sulfur and fire that continue to shape the world. This blending of myth and reality makes the story of the Gigantes not just a tale of gods and monsters, but a deep part of how people understood and explained the world around them. Among the mightiest of the giants was Alcyoneus, a giant so strong that he was immortal as long as he fought on his native soil. He was a terror to gods and men alike, even stealing the sacred cattle of Helios from the distant sunset isle of Erythea. The gods, recognizing the threat he posed, called upon Heracles to aid them in the battle. Heracles, armed with the wisdom of the goddess Athena, first shot an arrow that wounded Alcyoneus. But the giant's strength was such that he could recover. Only when Heracles dragged him away from the land of Pallene, beyond the borders where his immortality held power, did the giant finally perish. This clever strategy reveals the interplay of strength and cunning in the battles between gods and giants, where brute force alone was not enough to overcome these mighty foes. The hero's role was crucial, bridging mortal courage and divine favor in the fight to preserve order. Porphyrion was another of the greatest giants, known for his fierce battle against the gods themselves. During the fight, he was filled with a wild passion for the goddess Hera, instigated by Zeus to distract the giant. Porphyrion's attempt to seize and harm Hera was met with swift retaliation. Zeus struck him with a thunderbolt, while Heracles, acting as the protector of the gods, killed him with an arrow. This episode highlights the chaotic and dangerous nature of the giants, whose violence threatened even the highest divine powers, but also the unity and cooperation of gods and heroes who stood against such threats. Porphyrion's name was so well known that it became part of everyday language, inspiring even comedies, where the threat of Porphyrion was joked about as a challenge even for the birds threatening to attack heaven itself. Throughout these tales, the battles between gods and giants are not mere stories of violence, but deeply symbolic narratives about the struggle between order and chaos, civilization and wildness, divine rule and rebellious force. Each giant, each hero, and each place mentioned holds a piece of this grand myth, a myth that shaped the ancient understanding of the world and the forces that govern it. The giants, born of earth and filled with rage, represent the untamed powers that threaten the harmony of the cosmos, while the gods and their allies embody the forces of order and justice. The victories, losses, and legacies of these ancient conflicts continue to echo in the stories passed down through generations, reminding us of the eternal dance between creation and destruction, chaos and control, which lies at the heart of all existence. Some of the Gigantes managed to survive the great battles, but their fate was no less tragic or strange. Among the places where survivors fled was the region called Campanian Phlegra in Italy, a land known for its foul-smelling waters. The ancient geographer Strabo explains that the malodorous stream from a fountain in this area comes from the ichor, the divine blood, or the foul fluid of the bodies of these giants who had been driven out by the hero Heracles. These giants, known as the Loiternian Gigantes, sought refuge here but were hidden and shrouded by Mother Gaia, or Gaia, the earth itself, who covered them and gave the place its distinct stench. This story connects the landscape, with its sulfurous waters and strange odors, directly to the lingering presence of these defeated creatures, as if their bodies still affected the very earth and water. The seaboard nearby was also named Loiternia, showing how deeply the myth was woven into the geography and experience of the land, where even the smell of the place told of ancient, violent battles and the survival of monstrous forces. Far away on the island of Mykonos, another tale speaks of the last remnants of the Gigantes who were destroyed by Heracles. According to myth, beneath this island lie the last of the giants, crushed and buried by the hero's hand. This gave rise to a famous proverb, "All beneath Mykonos alone," used to describe things that are grouped under one name even though they are naturally distinct and separate. This phrase highlights how the story of the Gigantes was used in everyday language and thought, symbolizing the idea of overwhelming or crushing many things into one. The image of these giants lying beneath the island represents how myths explain not only history, but also language and the way people understand the world around them. One of the surviving Gigantes was Aristaios, sometimes spelled Aristeas, who managed to escape the deadly fire that destroyed his kin. His story is remarkable because, unlike the others who were burned by the wrath of the gods and volcanoes, Aristaios fled to Mount Etna in Sicily and survived. The Byzantine Greek lexicon known as the Suda tells us that Aristaios was the only Gigante to endure the devastation of the heavenly fire and the volcanic flames of Mount Etna. In a strange twist of fate, Aristaios was transformed into a dung beetle by his mother, Gaia, the earth. This transformation is significant because it represents both survival and a change from a fierce giant to a humble insect, symbolizing a fall from great power to a lowly form, but also a kind of new beginning. The dung beetle, called the Aithnaios Cantharos, or the dung beetle of Etna, reflects the mountain's great size and the enduring presence of this once mighty being in a new shape, connected to the earth and nature in a very different way. The burial of the giants beneath volcanic mountains also ties their stories closely to natural phenomena that ancient people observed and tried to explain. One of the most famous giants, Enceladus, was said to be buried beneath Mount Etna by the goddess Athena. His writhing and struggling beneath the earth were believed to cause the volcanic eruptions, with the fire and smoke coming from the restless giant's body as it moved. Others told similar stories about Typhoeus, another monstrous figure being buried beneath an island, perhaps the same or nearby volcano. The fiery, violent nature of volcanoes made them a perfect symbol for the imprisoned fury of the defeated giants, whose anger and power could never be fully extinguished even after death. The earth's shaking, fire, and smoke were seen as signs of this eternal struggle hidden beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the violent past and the power of the giants still lurking in the depths. Mount Vesuvius, another famous volcano near the Campanian plain, was also connected with the myths of the Gigantes. The volcanic activity there, like that of Etna, was thought to be a sign of the giants' ongoing presence beneath the earth, their bodies or spirits causing the eruptions and destructive power of the volcano. These stories gave meaning to the terrifying natural events that ancient people faced, linking the dangers of volcanic eruptions to the divine conflict between gods and monsters. The connection of the giants to these volcanoes made the mythic world come alive in the natural world, where gods, heroes, monsters, and nature all intertwined. Thus, the tales of the Gigantes' flight, survival, transformation, and burial show a continuous presence of these ancient beings in the landscape and imagination of the people. From foul-smelling waters in Italy to volcanic fires in Sicily, from hidden islands to changing forms in nature, the legacy of the giants remained powerful and deeply rooted. Their stories explain not only the past wars and battles with the gods, but also the mysteries of the earth itself, its strange smells, its shaking mountains, its fiery destruction, connecting human experience to myth in a way that shaped the way the ancient world understood itself and its surroundings. The Gigantes, though defeated, were never truly gone. They lived on beneath the earth, in the stones and waters, in the fire and smoke, forever part of the story of the world. The plain of Phlegra, steeped in legend and mystery, was said to be marked forever by the furious struggles of the buried giants beneath its surface. Ancient stories tell that these monstrous beings, defeated but not destroyed, writhed beneath the earth, their agonized movements causing the very land to tremble and shake. The great volcanic forces erupting from this region were believed to be the breath and fire exhaled by these imprisoned giants, locked in endless battle with the forces that held them captive. Philostratus the Elder, a Greek rhetorician from the 3rd century AD, described a volcanic island nearby in a way that made the power and terror of the place come alive. He said that fire smoldered under the whole island, creeping through underground caves and tunnels like veins of molten anger, and bursting through cracks in the earth in streams of blazing rivers that rolled down to the sea. These terrifying torrents of fire, running in billowing waves, were fanned by the winds, mixing with natural substances like bitumen and sulfur found on the island, which acted like fuel for the flames. The sea itself, with its winds and moisture, seemed to help kindle the fiery display, creating a spectacle of destruction and awe that nature itself had forged. Yet, the ancient painting Philostratus described went beyond the natural and entered the realm of myth, showing how deeply these stories were woven into the culture. The painting depicted a mighty giant struck down and pinned beneath the island, unable to escape but still alive in his death struggle. This figure, whether Typhon buried beneath Mount Etna in Sicily or Enceladus buried under Mount Vesuvius in Italy, symbolized the ongoing fight between the imprisoned giants and the earth pressing down upon them. Though crushed, these giants were not dead, but always dying, locked in a liminal state between life and death, their presence felt in every rumble and eruption. The painting captured the violent drama of this cosmic battle. Zeus hurling thunderbolts from the sky, striking down the defiant giant who, even as he weakens, clings to the earth for support, still trusting in its power to hold him and not yet ready to surrender completely. This vivid scene invites the viewer to imagine themselves part of this eternal conflict, standing at the foot of a trembling mountain, watching the thunderbolts flash and the earth tremble beneath the struggle of gods and giants. The peak of the mountain becomes a stage for the divine war, where Zeus's bolts meet the defiance of the mighty foe beneath, a spectacle of light, sound, and raw power. The earth, personified and active, is not merely a passive battleground, but a powerful participant, pressing down with its vast weight to keep the giant contained, yet also shaking and groaning under the burden of this living force trapped within. This image blends natural phenomena with mythic imagination, transforming volcanic eruptions and earthquakes into a timeless story of struggle between the divine order and chaotic primal forces. Through this tale, the ancient world sought to understand the terrifying power of the Earth's fire and movement, giving it meaning as the remnants of a titanic battle that shaped the world itself. Thus, the plain of Phlegra and its volcanic surroundings became more than just a place on the map. They became a living monument to the Gigantes, a reminder that even in defeat, their presence endured beneath the surface. The fire and smoke, the trembling ground, and the thunderous sounds of eruption were all signs of the continuing fight, a fight that echoed the original clash between gods and giants. These myths helped ancient people explain the mysterious and frightening natural disasters they experienced, turning them into stories of heroism, punishment, and cosmic balance. In this way, the myth of the Gigantes remained forever alive in the land itself, etched in stone, smoke, and flame, a story told not only in words and pictures, but in the very earth beneath their feet. Philostratus tells us of a scene shrouded in mist, placed by the will of Poseidon, god of the sea, who cloaks the contest in a veil that makes it seem like a battle of the past rather than one happening in the present. The goddess Gaia, the earth itself, grows weary because Poseidon does not allow her to remain steady or rest in place. This mist hides the truth of the battle, transforming the present clash into a memory, a shadow of what once was. The ancient poets spoke often of the volcanic mountain Athena, known to us as Etna, with stories full of fire and fury. They tell that the terrible Typho, or Enceladus, lies bound beneath its fiery surface, and as he writhes in his death agony, the fire that escapes from him is the very smoke and flame that we see billowing from the mountain. These stories were dramatic and poetic, passed down through generations, painting scenes of gods and monsters locked in eternal conflict. Yet even with all this fiery spectacle, some cautioned against blindly believing that every volcanic mountain owed its power to the presence of giants or gods like Hephaestus, the god of fire and metalworking. Instead, some volcanoes might burn for other natural reasons, reminding us to measure myth against reality, even as we marvel at its grandness. Among these tales is one told by Lycophron, who speaks of the island of Sicily itself, where the back of the giants was crushed and the fierce form of the monstrous Typhon was laid low. This island, boiling with flame and fire, was said to be the very place where the king of the immortals, Zeus, established a new race in mockery. This ugly race was made to ridicule those who dared raise war against the sons of Kronos, the Titan father. This mocking creation took the form of apes, strange creatures meant to reflect the defiance and folly of those who challenged divine order. The story shows how the gods' wrath did not only punish, but also humiliated their enemies, creating a living reminder of the consequences of rebellion. The myths continue with the exhumation of the Gigante Damisos, told by Ptolemy Hephaestion. Damisos was known as the fastest of all the giants, buried at Pallene, a place famous in the tales of war between gods and giants. The story is connected with the mortal world through the figure of Thetis, mother of the great hero Achilles, who burned her children in secret, fearful of their fate. When Achilles was born, Thetis tried to make him immortal by fire, but left one foot unburnt, and Peleus, his father, took the child away, leaving him with Chiron, the wise centaur and teacher of heroes. Chiron, in his role as healer and sage, dug up the body of Damisos, linking the mortal heroes and their divine and monstrous foes in a complex web of fate and power. These tales remind us that the War of the Gods was not just a cosmic battle, but one that shaped the lives of men and heroes who followed. In all these stories, The earth itself is a powerful player. She groans and struggles under the weight of the imprisoned giants, their presence felt in every trembling mountain and every volcanic eruption. Poseidon's mist hides the truth, but the land cannot hide the scars of battle. The fiery breath of Enceladus under Mount Etna, the shaking of the ground at Phlegra, the volcanic fury at Vesuvius, all are signs of the ongoing conflict beneath the surface. These natural wonders became living monuments to the power and fury of the Gigantomachy, the war between gods and giants that shaped the ancient world and gave meaning to its terrifying forces. Thus, the tales of the giants' defeat, their mocking descendants, their burial beneath fiery mountains, and their lasting impact on the earth and its people remain a powerful part of the ancient imagination. The myths connect gods, monsters, and men in a story of struggle and survival, punishment and memory, binding the land itself to the stories told by poets and passed down through the ages. These legends explain not only the violence of the earth, but also the enduring power of myth to transform the world and make sense of its mysteries. The story of the giants, the mighty and fearsome beings born of the earth, extends even into the shadowy realms of the dead, where the souls of the fallen linger and the echoes of their struggle still reverberate. The great Roman poet Statius, in his epic, the Thebaid, speaks of Erebus, the gloomy underworld ruled by Hades, where many monstrous beings dwell. Among them are the twisted chains of solid adamant that bind the Gigantes, the giants, who once challenged the gods themselves. These creatures are not only foes on the battlefield above, but also restless spirits imprisoned beneath the world, yearning to break free and rise again. Statius reminds us of other fearsome figures, such as the centaurs, half man and half horse, full of wild rage, and the many-headed Aegeon, now diminished in shadow, all held captive in this prison house of the dead, where even Kronos, the former Titan king and father of Zeus, suffers his own unhappy fate. The story moves from the physical clash on Earth to a haunting vision of imprisonment and eternal struggle, revealing that the battle between the gods and the giants was not confined to the mortal world, but echoed into the deepest and darkest places of existence. From these dark tales, the story turns to a time after the Great Wars, a time when the gods gathered to divide the spoils of victory and to decide the order of the cosmos. This moment of peace and order is said to have taken place at Mekone, sometimes called Mekone, a sacred seat of the Blessed Ones, the gods themselves. Here, according to ancient poets like Callimachus, the gods drew lots to apportion their honors and privileges after defeating the giants. This division was no small matter. It determined who would rule the sky, who would govern the seas, and who would command the earth and the underworld. It was a moment of balance restored, a settling of the divine family after the chaos of war. The gods who had fought bravely and proven themselves worthy received their rightful places in the order of things, while the impious and lawless giants were cast down and removed from the world of men. Diodorus Siculus, a historian of the 1st century before Christ, confirms this tale, saying that Zeus not only wiped out the wicked giants, but also rewarded the noblest gods, heroes, and men by granting them their honors in the New World Order. The battle was over, the enemy defeated, and the heavens, earth, and sea were once again divided among those who upheld order and justice. Valerius Flaccus, a Roman poet writing in the 1st century AD, captures the awe of this moment in his Argonautica, where he tells of the gods gathering after the Gigantomachy, the war against the giants, to claim their places and their rights. This event marked the end of a violent chapter in divine history and the beginning of a new era ruled by Zeus and the Olympians. The triumph over the giants was not only a victory of strength, but also of rightful rule, order, and harmony among the gods. Through this victory, the cosmos was set straight, with each god knowing his role and place, while the chaos embodied by the giants was banished forever from the realm of the living. In the midst of these grand tales, there are whispers of mortal involvement as well. The great hero Achilles, son of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis, is linked to the giants through a mysterious tale involving the astragale, a bone or talisman. According to one version of the myth, the astragale of a giant was removed and incorporated into Achilles' foot by certain ingredients or magical means. This astragale was lost when Achilles was pursued by Apollo, leading to his downfall. The mixing of divine, monstrous, and mortal elements in this story highlights the complex interweaving of fates and powers in Greek mythology, where heroes walk the line between gods and monsters, shaped by forces both seen and unseen. Thus, the giant's shadow stretches across many layers of myth, caught between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, defeated yet restless. Their power broken, but their story still alive in the hearts of men and the mouths of poets. From their chains of adamant in Erebus to the fiery battlegrounds on earth, from the volcanic mountains where their bodies lie buried to the sacred places where the gods divided their honors, the giants remain a symbol of defiance against divine order and a reminder of the price of rebellion. Their defeat brought peace and structure, but the memory of their strength and fury endures, woven forever into the fabric of myth and the story of the gods. It was only after the great and fierce battle with Iapetus, the leader of the Titanese, and the exhausting struggles at Phlegra against the terrible Gigantes, that Zeus, the mighty king of the gods, was finally given the grand palace of Olympus and set to rule over the entire universe. This victory was not simple or quick. It was the result of long and difficult war, where the gods fought fiercely to secure their place and order in the cosmos. The battle at Phlegra was especially fierce, a place known as a battlefield for the gods and their monstrous enemies, the Gigantes, the children of earth, who rose up against heaven itself. Their defiance was strong and violent, shaking the very ground, and only after their defeat was Zeus firmly established as the supreme ruler. Yet this victory and establishment of order came at a cost and stirred great anger from the earth. Gaia herself, the mother of the giants, whose fury was only deepened by the defeat of her children. In her wrath, Gaia turned to the dark depths of Tartarus, the deep and terrible pit of the underworld, and from this union, she gave birth to a terrible and dreadful being called Typhoeus in the land of Cilicia. Typhoeus was born out of fury and vengeance, a monstrous force meant to challenge the gods and their rule, an embodiment of the earth's rage and a new threat to the established order. This birth was not just a continuation of violence, but a powerful symbol of how the earth, wounded and angry by the loss of the giants, fought back with a force so great that even the gods feared it. Typhoeus would come to represent the chaos that still lurked beneath the surface of the world, a force that sought to undo the order the gods had fought so hard to create. Thus, the story of the war against the giants did not end with their defeat, but gave rise to new challenges, new battles, and the constant struggle between order and chaos, between the gods who ruled the heavens and the wild forces of the earth that sought to overturn their power. This tale reminds us that even in victory, the gods faced threats born of anger and pain, and the world remained a place of conflict and change, shaped by battles both seen and unseen.